Mr. President, I wanted to come to the floor this evening and join a number of my colleagues from both sides of the aisle who are concerned about the federal budget and our ever-increasing deficits and debt. But today I'm also speaking on behalf of the 4.5 million Coloradans who are worried that we won't have the discipline to do anything about it. They know that our great nation won't win the global economic race unless we take some responsible action here on the floor of the Senate and soon. And I have to say, I don't think the debate that we have been having here offers them a whole lot of solace. And I say that because instead of getting to work on the bipartisan Gang of Six deficit reduction plan, which draws from the President's bipartisan fiscal commission, headed by, I have to say this, two true American patriots, former Senator Alan Simpson and North Carolinian Erskine Bowles, instead of getting onto that plan and the substantive proposal it makes, we're debating what looks to be a bumper sticker campaign gimmick called cut, cap, and balance. I have a hard time even saying it. But I got to say, I've spent a good deal of time analyzing budget tools. After all, I was one of the first and one of currently only a few Democratic senators who signed on to a balanced budget amendment to our Constitution this Congress. I've also been fighting for many years for other smart budgeting tools, including pay-as-you-go budgeting, a line-item veto, and a ban on earmarks, which would help reduce waste and rein in federal spending. But let me be clear that cut, cap, and balance is not about balancing the federal budget, because when you read the bill, it becomes clear that it's simply about ideology. While the name of the bill seems reasonable enough, it's conveniently designed literally to fit on a bumper sticker, but the language of the bill doesn't represent a balanced approach to deficit and debt reduction, and for that reason alone, I can't support it. As I've said, I've supported the idea of a balanced budget amendment, even though a number, maybe I should say most of our caucus, Mr. President, has opposed the idea. However, the balanced budget amendment contained in cut, cap, and balance is not about balance. It's about locking in, if you really look at it, special interest tax breaks for corporations and the wealthy, which would then force draconian program cuts that would harm our nation's middle class, not to mention the most vulnerable in our communities all across our country. I got to say, this isn't a balanced way to pursue deficit reduction. It makes a balanced budget nearly impossible to achieve when you get into the guts of this idea, because it ties literally one hand behind our back by preventing the Congress from closing wasteful special interest tax breaks. In addition, Mr. President, the bill in front of us holds the increase in the debt limit hostage. Mr. President, the debt limit needs to be raised by August 2nd to avoid a first-ever government default on our debt obligations. Cut, cap, and balance dictates that the debt limit cannot be increased until Congress approves a constitutional balanced budget amendment. Now, even if you're the most optimistic person in the world, a scenario for passage, ratification, and implementation of a balanced budget amendment shows that it's unlikely to take effect for at least 10 years. 10 years. I want to, not 10 days, 10 years. I've always maintained that a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution, which again I want to mention I support, should be a backstop put in place only after we've made the tough decisions about reducing our spiraling deficits here in the here and now. If we were to tie our nation's obligations to pay its bills to the passage of a one-sided and partisan balanced budget amendment, that would be bad enough as it is. But cut, cap, and balance would also lead to severe cuts in Social Security and Medicare. And it would actually lock in billions of dollars in tax breaks currently in our tax code, which benefit the wealthiest citizens as well as big oil and corporations that have spent decades shipping jobs overseas. Mr. President, this is such an egregious proposal that I have a sneaking suspicion that it wasn't actually designed to pass the U.S. Senate. I believe it was designed to be a campaign gimmick. because it certainly does nothing to address the problems we face right here and now, which is the looming default of our government, the U.S. government. Let me be clear, and I think the public has begun to understand this. Raising our debt limit's not about future spending or paying for more government. It's about paying our previous bills. Business leaders, economists, rating agencies, and especially Treasury Secretary Geithner have told us that our credit rating, were we to default, would take years to rebuild, and that our country would never be the same if we were to default on our debt. Mr. President, you know this, you businessman, we can't ask for a do-over or a mulligan if we default on our debt. We can't say, oh, we were just kidding. This is truly the real deal. I want to share some of the ways we'd be directly affected by a government default. Paychecks for soldiers in Afghanistan and Iraq and at bases around the world conceivably wouldn't go out. FAA towers could shut down. Border crossings could close. Operations at the FBI and the CIA would be put at risk. Safety inspections of the food that we eat and the cargo that enters our ports could halt. And the resulting spike in interest rates would ironically make our debt even harder to tackle, because each 1% rise in interest rates alone would result in $130 billion in increased interest payments on our national debt each year. Perhaps most importantly, hardworking American families would also feel the crunch. A spike in interest rates would effectively force a tax on all Americans and American businesses due to increased consumer costs. Just as important, failure to raise the debt limit would lock up credit markets, because the U.S. would no longer be seen as a reliable credit risk. Coincidentally, Mr. President, yesterday an important consumer protection law, which Senator Lugar and I introduced and passed, and you helped us with on the floor here last year, went into effect. It provides Americans with free access to their credit scores, which is so important to understanding their own credit risk. And FICO, this is some good news in a day that has a few dark clouds hanging over it. FICO has estimated that as many as 500 million credit scores will be given to Americans for free each year because of this important bipartisan law. Working on this legislation, I learned a lot about credit scores, what they mean, how they're calculated, and how critical they are to economic success. But here's how I'm tying this back to our discussion today. It got me wondering, what would America's credit score look like if we defaulted on our debt? Nearly 2/3 of a credit score is based on an individual's total debt and payment history. So here's how I think our great nation would score if we don't raise the debt limit by August 2nd. We all know that our debt is spiraling out of control. That is demerit number one. But if we now also are unwilling to agree to pay our debts, demerit number two, we will be left with a credit score of a deadbeat. And Mr. President, I don't think that's the way we see ourselves or want to see ourselves in the 21st century's global economic race. We want to be at the head of the pack. We want to win that race. But to see ourselves as a deadbeat, I mean, that's not what America represents to me. It's certainly not the way Coloradans see us. And the people see this very clearly. They're ahead of us. They understand the risks we face. And I want to share a couple of letters that Coloradans got into my hands just this last week. Sarah Jane wrote me last week, and she was to the point. She said, "Dear Senator, I'm furious about the games being played with a debt ceiling. This is really abusive to our country." Another Coloradan, Nicholas, sent me an email that said, "Dear Senator Udall, Republicans are calling for big cuts to vital programs and refusing to increase revenue. This is lunacy. As a native Coloradan, I and most others here work for a living. We don't own yachts, planes, or mansions. The thought of Republicans gutting the social safety net in order to prevent millionaires and billionaires from paying a little extra tax makes me wonder what we really value in this country." I couldn't agree more. We have some tough choices to make. But some members of Congress are so lost in their ideological rhetoric that finding an agreement on our deficits and debt seems out of reach. it feels to me, I really don't want to say this, but it feels to me that some of our colleagues would be perfectly fine with shutting down the federal government out of a belief that it's grown too large. They believe that a catastrophic shock to the system is the only remedy. But I have to say, our fiscal imbalances are not caused by the things they keep saying they want to cut. Foreign aid, federal salaries, and other programs are a tiny percentage of overall spending. In fact, Appropriations Chairman Inouye, the Dean of the Senate, President Pro Tem of the Senate, noted last week that in, quote, in constant dollars adjusted for population growth, non-defense discretionary spending is at the same level in fiscal year 2011 as it was in fiscal year 2001, when the federal government ran a $128 billion surplus. The fact is that our fiscal imbalances are caused by three historical irregularities: record low revenues, an increasingly aging population, and heightened security needs in the wake of September 11th. They each demand thoughtful and balanced solutions, and only a bipartisan deal will get us those balanced solutions. Now, I just have to say, no matter how much bloated rhetoric we hear, there's one simple fact, and that is that we're all in this together. But it seems like, to me, often and unfortunately, like we're in the same canoe paddling furiously upstream away from the waterfall behind us off our stern, but half our crew has thrown their paddles overboard in protest. I just don't get it. I don't understand it. And what's so agonizing is that we have a bipartisan solution right in front of us. And as I mentioned in the beginning of my remarks, Mr. President, I was thrilled to see the Gang of Six this week report a responsible, balanced, and very bipartisan agreement. Now, I don't agree with every aspect of it. I do believe, however, that the plan would responsibly reduce our debt and protect our middle class while also allowing our economy, not only just allowing, but incenting our economy to grow. And this plan has already received bipartisan support, not just here, but across the country. Boy, it's my feeling, rather than arguing, we ought to be acting on these recommendations. Many of us just want to get to work. It's hot here. We can take our jackets off, roll up our sleeves. And I know there are members on both sides of the aisle who share that sentiment, even if others here are demanding that they remain quiet about it. There's no question that the fiscal challenges in front of us demand a bipartisan solution. But the clock's running. The sand is rapidly running out of the hourglass, and we have to get to work on making the necessary changes to get our fiscal house and its foundation in order. Frankly, some issues should rise above partisanship and politics and campaigns and our country's economic and national security. By the way, the two are linked. Secretary Gates and Admiral Mullen, presiding officer I serve in the Armed Services Committee, they made it very clear that they see one of our biggest threats is the country's fiscal situation. A broke country is going to be a weak country. So our economic and national security, I think, falls in a category that ought to be above politics and partisanship. Cut, cap, and balance is wrong for our country. It represents more divisiveness, way too much gamesmanship, and more politicking. Let's listen to our constituents. I shared letters from two of them from my state of Colorado who are pleading with us to get to work and focus our attention on the sensible bipartisan Gang of Six plan. Let's combine it with a debt limit increase to ward off default and work together and pass it into our laws before our national credit rating is downgraded and it damages our chances of winning the global economic race. That's what Coloradans are expecting of me, and that's what I expect of the 100 of us who are so fortunate to serve in the United States Senate. I'm not being dramatic. I'm not a particularly dramatic individual, but I have to tell the presiding officer and my colleagues that I think nothing less than the fate of the U.S. economy hangs in the balance. And I'm willing to stay here day and night, weekends, holidays, to help put a long-term, balanced, and bipartisan plan in motion.